All right, I'm going to call this meeting of the BET Budget Committee to order. Sorry that I was a few minutes late. The first item on our agenda is HD1 from the Health Department, approval to use public funds for fiscal 19 of $66,752. And here representing the Health Department is
Debbie Edwards.
Debbie Edwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
So this is the annual grant we get from the state of Connecticut that's based on population, right?
Yes.
Right.
So I would like to first thank you for reviewing this grant. I'm stepping in today for Caroline Beasley because she has an important medical appointment she had to be at. So yes, this application is for the state per capita grant for $66,752.01. And we actually received the money already.
And when you make the application, you identify how we're going to use it. How did the amount? I meant to go back and look at what grants we've gotten in the past. Is this about the same order of magnitude, about 60,000 or so?
Around there. Last year, I believe it was a little more. I think it was $7,000 more.
Okay.
But it's usually the way Caroline wanted to spend the money. The majority is all the standard and routine stuff we usually use it for.
Right. And you may not know the answer to this question. That's fine. Caroline can follow up later. But I know the accreditation process has been going on a few years now. Do you know the time frame for when the work in the department's completed?
No, only because we thought we would been able to do it last June, but we did not have enough information.
Okay,
that they requested.
So you're still you're still in the application phase, but you're
It's
hopefully
really a
nearing.
long process.
I remember when I was treasurer of a nursery school and they went through this process. It was a very long, involved process getting accreditation. Are there questions from my colleagues? Mr. Mason, Ms. Tarkington, Mr. Raymond?
Nope.
No? Okay, can I have a motion to approve the use of $66,752.01?
So moved. Seconded.
Yes, routine. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, a vote, I suppose. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 400. The next item on the agenda is PW1 from release of conditions on the initial design for Eastern Greenwich Civic Center. And Mr. Manelli is with us, and Mr. Siciliano is staying in the back. Okay.
Hiding.
That's okay.
Good evening.
Good evening, Al.
So this request for release of conditions is the end of a long 3-year battle or a lot of work. Starting off with hiring a professional consultant to develop a town-wide survey, the first selectman appointing a building evaluation committee, having the survey go live over the internet, getting the results back, analyzing the results, having the committee review those results, a lot of debate, several public meetings. We went out in March on an RFQL to find architects. We had 13 respondents. We evaluated the 13 respondents. We reduced it to 5. We asked for the 5 to come back to make presentations. I sent that list of goals as part of that request of what we would want them to present to us. Actually, 4 came back and made presentations on July 9th. It was a stiff competition. All the architects had something good to present. It actually resulted in 2 of the architects tying. We had to have a tie-break meeting and a tie-break vote, and we have come to a decision on an architect. Unfortunately, we do not have all the funds unless we get account number 171144 released. What that's going to do by releasing those funds, there's still funds in 16156, $124,375, and the releasing of the $170,000 will allow me, or have available funds of 294. We need $250,000 to do a 30% design. Now, 30% design will allow us to apply for a municipal improvement and preliminary site plan approval, go through all the committees of the Planning and Zoning Department, and go back for final site plan approval.
Net, remind us, I know, but the actual condition, actually, Roland, you probably brought it, is,
It's
it's in front of us. Okay. So it's really not related to all that work. It was, to get release of the money, it was the environmental conditions. Can you summarize the test results?
Right. Very early on, we had the area tested, and we did a Phase 1 and a Phase 2 environmental study, and everything came back negative, below all the standards.
And the study was on what part of the property?
The drawing I gave you or sent you today, this morning, it was around the exterior of the building in those locations, of the existing building.
Are there any questions on?
So
test
inside
results?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
inside the dark,
Inside the dotted line, but closer to the actual building, that's the existing building. The T-shaped structure.
Ms. Harkington?
So Al, I had thought this was to be more or less in the footprint of the building. Is that not correct? And I noticed in your cover note, which I thank you for, you talked about the usable square feet, or, whatever we want to call it, the FAR used of the footprint. I'm not sure what it was, 31,000 square feet, and it's going to 38+ thousand square feet.
Yes.
So more or less a 25% increase in space. So can you explain where that space is, or how it differs from the footprint? I mean, is there a second floor? What's happening here?
Okay, so just the first comment about FAR, the site plan that you guys have in front of you is 4.15 acres. That's part of the total 13 acres of the entire eastern site.
Right.
We've restricted our design and our development to the 4 acres. So FAR is not even a question because we're well under that. The 31,000 square foot number that was in the cover email that I sent
Right.
is the existing square footage of the building today.
Right.
And the architect that we want to select is going to 38,002. The difference in square footage, and I guess the only way to explain this easily is if you look at some of those replacement goals, the gymnasium is at 8,000 square feet. We found through the results of the survey and debates among the committee that the existing exhibition hall or community area, which is the old bowling alley, is way inefficient in space. So they've increased that space to 8,000 to match the the new gym. So you're going to have 2 spaces of 8,000 square foot minimums. So, and that's probably that's the difference.
So it's in those large spaces. I did
Yes.
notice there were 2 large spaces when I looked at your very good memo. So,
Yep.
And then the other question I had about it was, somewhere in here, I think I read about testing for the soil conditions or weight load, whatever we want to call it, that still needs to be done. And perhaps we didn't word our condition exactly or somehow in the wording. But I thought that was one thing that we wanted, so, I'm probably not going to question this, but after that testing is done, if you could just share that with us, if there's any issues, that would be helpful, but I'm not making that.
We're sort of confused, even Amy was, when we were reading the conditions, we were sort of confused about exactly what you're looking for. If you're talking about soil conditions to support a building,
Right.
that's something we do normally as part of the architectural review.
Right.
They have to test the soils to make sure that, do you have to put piles in, or can you go with spread footings?
Right.
That's part of the A&E's base work that he's going to be doing. They can't design the building without that information. We did have a soils report done only for the fact that one of the key design limitations and concerns that we had going out is we did not want to have the architects present something that might have been good for the committee, but not able to be built in practicality. And we felt that whatever the square footage was, that we're going to have to do something to meet the town's stormwater management plan. So we actually included information on soils from a soil test we did, so that the presenters could actually calculate the size of some kind of, whether they're going to use retainage pond or a green roof or whatever they were going to do, and they all the presenters accounted for something for design of the stormwater management plan.
Again, I think, if you could just put a little tickler in your file that when you get the testing in on the, weight-bearing tests and so forth for that soil, if you can just let
Okay.
Roland know, put together a little, just to update us on that, because I thought that had been one of our original questions here. That would not hold me up from
Okay.
the release of these funds, but just
Okay.
as an ongoing process, if that's all right.
Often even the design team or the owner doesn't get the soil boring test results, but yeah.
Well, in this particular case, I think it had been discussed when we were doing it. I think also was the issue that, it was building over a building location, so that would obviously cause penetration through the building itself. And there had been some discussion about this before, and so, I don't think it's unusual. I'm not making it a condition. I
Just to remind everybody, if you grant our request tonight and release the $170,000, there is another account in this year's budget for $300,000, which is also subject to release. That will be the next phase. If we get through final site plan, we'll be back to make a presentation of what the building's going to be, and in the design package, we have some particular estimates that the architect has to, provide, so that we could advise you of what the construction costs moving forward would be. And at that time, you could ask that question, and we would have the answer then,
Okay.
definitely.
The only condition
Thank
on
you.
those dollars is the MI, I believe.
Correct. Let me, before I open it up
Sorry.
to my colleagues who have questions, Roland, the condition that you showed, that was a fiscal 17 appropriation,
was.
right? Okay. So just to point out that you printed
Yeah,
this out
I
on a
used-
fiscal
yeah,
20
yeah.
headliner, but I just want to make sure we are looking at the old money. The new money is subject to the MI. Okay, Mr. Raymer, did you
No, I
have-
asked and answered. I have no other questions.
Mr. Mason.
Two things. I mean, Ms. Moriarty's hitting on it. So we see you, DPW, I should say, all the time, enough A&E to get through MI. I know you have the MI with the fire department going. I think we get some emails from time to time about municipal improvement in town, as you may understand from other sources. But it seems like you have a pretty standard pattern now of what you request to get done A&E wise, so your impact with planning and zoning is straight through, you get what you need, and then you go to the next phase of the project. Talk to us, what are their requirements? In other words, my second phase of this is, what Ms. Moriarty brought up about the time on this. I really think we ought to make sure everyone knows how much effort you, Parks and Rec, Board of Parks and Rec has put in this, reaching out to the tenants, the user groups, and how many people have had impact so far. We've had representation on it as well. And I think, so people understand that the process is the process, we follow the process, and that's how we turn out things on time, on budget, and what the people want. So MI, I mean, what are the steps for MI? Because we are constantly dealing with this, and it gets a little confusing at times.
So how we do MI is that the first step of MI is to make a request to appear before the Board of Selectmen. To do that, the Board of Selectmen are going to want to see at least some description of what we're planning to build and a floor plan or an elevation, something. They vote. If they vote in favor, they send a letter to the Planning and Zoning. They send a letter to the Director of Planning and Zoning that goes to the Commission, that they know that an MI has been moved forward by the Board, a municipal MI has been moved forward by the Board of Selectmen, and there's an actual application that we fill out in DPW that has specific amount of information they're requesting from us, floor plans, elevation, square footages, typical stuff. But at the same time, that same information is required for preliminary site plan. So, I mean, how can I talk about, in this case, how could I talk about replacing the building at Eastern if I don't tell people where I'm replacing it on the property? So I need a survey. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that just melds together. So we have so many days from when the Board of Selectmen approves the MI and moves it forward that we present our MI to the Commission, Planning and Zoning Commission. So what we strive for is to have all the information before I even go to the Board of Selectmen, so that once they approve it, we could turn around, write the applications for municipal improvement and preliminary site plan, submit them, get them before the Planning and Zoning Commission on the same night, and they're often voting on the same night, municipal improvement and preliminary site plan approval. They might make comments on the preliminary site plan that, okay, we don't like this here, we don't like that there. Go to your committees like Architectural Review Committee, and then come back to us, because they get reports from those subcommittees on a complete package. So we would then go back, once all that was done, all those committees, we would then go back and make an application for final site plan approval. If we're granted final site plan approval, the architect basically has no other interference to go from 30% of a design to move it to 100% of design, which is basically the specifications and drawings for competitive bid. In our case, we always ask for estimates along the way in case you guys are asking where we're hit, depending where we're hitting in a budget year. The fastest has ever happened, the fastest, was in July of, I believe it was 15, when we proposed the pool. We went for municipal improvement and preliminary site plan in July and got final site plan approval in December, that same year.
That's 6 months. And that's fast.
That's real fast. I hope to beat the record on this one, but you know, we never know. A lot of design is going to go into this one. There's going to be a lot of design time.
So this is what we're going to call the textbook approach to projects. My theory is we need to make sure more people understand concept to completion, and this is part of that education I'm trying to get a grip on here. And then in the middle of that, before that, you have your user groups, the tenants, Board of Parks and Rec. So you've had all that input too.
That's already been inputted. The only step that I need now, once we hire the architect, he'll start to put together an actual drawing of the, I mean, they presented their vision of the building. Now we're going to actually start applying stuff, and what we already had some discussions amongst the committee, what we like and don't like. So I'll be relaying those to the architect, and he'll be putting those in. We'll have probably another meeting with the committee so that everybody's aware of what's going forward, so if they get questions asked. And then once I have that information and we're ready to go, we'll pull the trigger and ask the Board of Selectmen to be on the agenda.
It's more of a process than it's alluded to in day-to-day conversations.
If you look at the zoning regs, actually, it says on a municipal improvement that it requires a site plan, full site plan. So, Katie, if I think I have it right, Ms. DeLuca, if I think I have that right, she has a kind of a working understanding that she is looking for 50% drawings, not the full drawings and things, for her site plan approval on an MI, right?
No, 30%.
30%.
I take that back. What she's asking for is, this is where the building's going. We're not going to move the building at 30%. 30% is just 30% of the whole design package. She wants to know where that building is going to sit. She wants all the environmental stuff done. She wants what Leslie's asking for about the piles or the foundation, the soil bearing reports. They're going to want to, we need to present to them, this is what's happening. We've met the planning and zoning regulations. We've we've done parking analysis, we've done our traffic analysis. All those little things have been done so that when they get final site plan, the only person that could change them drawings is the customer. It's not, I'm not beating, I don't have to worry about any other regulatory commission saying, well, at the end, we want to change it. It's done. It's done when final site plan is given.
So,
Leslie, just one,
Yep,
just just one thing. On approval tonight of the 170, like I said, that allows us to do our 30%. With the $300,000 in the, in this year's budget, we're still going to have a shortfall to pay the architect. The final number that we negotiated with the architect, we're short $190,625, or $200,000.
You're going to come back.
What's your plan?
And we'll have to come
What-
back, depending on
what's
how
your
this
plan
all
for
plays
getting the
out, it might be
appropriation?
an interim.
So so how are you entering into a contract with the architect when you're
With the
short
way
of the
the
funds?
way the contract, the way the bid was laid out, we're bidding and we're applying steps, so
So
we
you're
could,
only hiring him for
the
this-
30%.
the 30%, and in theory, you could walk away, or he could
Yes.
walk, well, I guess he can't walk away, it's probably a one-way option.
right, and as long as his pricing is in and doesn't change, we go to the next step.
I would encourage you, because if the step is really between MI and then you're going to construction documents, that you get your appropriation prior to you coming back to us for that
Yeah, we will.
release of this funds.
We wanted to get this done and move forward, because this could take, we still have to go to contract yet, so that it's going to take another 4 weeks to
Right.
do. So we have some time here, but I would think before Christmas I'll be
And
back.
let me just ask a question. If for some reason you didn't get that appropriation, are the documents you're getting from this architect for what you can afford to pay for usable to you, or do they own the design?
They're mine, or they're the town's. The only problem is, try to get another architect to build off those designs are going to be pretty hard.
I mean, my concern is that you're committing to a expenditure where you don't have the appropriation. And so while it seems to be a funding stream that you can defend and you could most likely get approval for, you don't have it now.
Right, but at the same point, none of the bidders were in the range of what we had appropriated.
That
And I know
doesn't
it
change.
doesn't, right,
It
it
doesn't
doesn't
change the
change,
fact.
but we'll have to take that chance, because we've already delayed this project long enough. We seem to have some steam rolling here, and would like to move forward.
Yeah, I have to think about that a little bit, but Ms. Tarkington.
So, Al, actually, you make me want to ask another question. You said you have a feeling for what the cost is. So would you share what you think that cost is? And also the fact that the architectural costs are going up by 190 or whatever you said. I think that's approximately what you said. That would imply to me that the project is also going up by some, say, $4 million. So is that kind of what you're sharing with us at this point in time?
No. Architectural fees are based on the construction of a project. You just said that. But they normally include the construction management, and we don't want the construction management included because that's part of the construction cost, not part of this initial cost. So when I did the estimates for this year to make up the difference, I used a number like 4.5%. I felt that was a good number, and I was a little bit shy on that.
So I was using the number 5% when I just did my, back of the envelope without a calculator. So, I mean, again, that would still imply to me that this could be another $4 million more expensive than we had originally planned, the Eastern Greenwich Civic
Actually, the presenter that we would like to award to, he projected the cost of the building, he was below the $15 million. He was below $15 million. He was like at 13.5 at that time. I mean, again, he's giving us off the back of the envelope
Right.
estimates too, but he was at around 13.5.
Sure.
Is this architect someone who has either dealt with the town or Greenwich-based, or is
Yes.
this? Okay, thank you. I mean, I think that makes a difference because we have our own hurdles here, don't we? Thank you.
So let me just ask, while I'm still thinking about how to deal with this appropriation problem, the process, right now, you have the concept for the design, the scope here is pretty complete. It doesn't look like there are any open issues or holes. The issue will be when you get your design and get your cost estimates, whether you can fully accomplish this within the
Right.
parameters. Your user groups and your committee, you've gotten buy-off from or has the final scope been circulated through the user groups? I know you had a couple very large meetings with opinions all over the universe on what should be in here.
Scott Johnson is here, and he could answer that question as well as Joe Siciliano, because Joe really is
Sure.
with the Board of Parks and Rec, but Scott has been doing a lot of the public meetings.
So we can just give you some description of the process. We're meeting as a committee. This is a committee that was appointed by the first selectman. Had various meetings along the way, met with the consultants, met with the community. I won't speak for the chair of the committee. He's right here, he can speak for himself. We feel that it's been a very public process, and that people's comments have been taken into consideration. And, we have consistency on the committee and with the vote of the committee as far as what the goals would be and objectives that we would put in this building as far as, developing the facility plan. So, I don't know, Scott, you want to add any more to that? As the chairman, I think we have had great cross-representation, and I think we've heard people's opinions, and, we can't give everybody
Right.
all of what they want, but we're trying to deal around the common factors that people have been most vocal about.
Well, because of the long history of this, including prior failures, we kind of did the feedback process a little bit differently. So I was involved at the first go-around, which was kind of led by Karen Sada-Khan and OGRCC, and it failed. It failed because it went way beyond the budget constraints. It went way beyond just reality. So what we did this time is we met as a committee and we tried to figure out what we thought the basics should be. Should we renovate? Should we tear it down and build anew? Should we expand the footprint? Should we keep it somewhat as is? As is meaning allocation of what's there now. So there's a certain percentage to athletics, certain percentage to non-athletic. And then we went to the community, which meant 4 RTM committee meetings. So the districts, the relevant districts, plus Parks and Rec Committee of RTM, and said, here's what we think as a basics, and here are the comments that we've been getting. So, for example, some of the athletic user groups wanted a field house, 14,000 square foot field house, in addition to what is there now. Some people wanted swimming pools, some people wanted hockey rinks. The user survey helped us a lot on that to basically say, here's what the users and here's what the community wants. So then we distilled it down after receiving these comments and basically said, with the CIP in mind, the idea of replacing this with its basic footprint and basic square footage with additional amenities and some new pizzazz is realistic. And I got to say, people supported it. The only dissension might have been a much bigger facility. And we just thought that was unrealistic. It wouldn't happen. Karen was helpful from a BET perspective, but we all looked at the CIP and we were trying to be realistic because there's other stuff coming down the pike. We also paid attention to historic preservation because we had to, and we should. And there was little, if any, initiative on that at all, even though we did get one letter. So we feel confident that the consensus is there. It's very difficult to design a building like this where, you got a lot of user groups. When we met with the, with the architects, we felt even better because the architects kind of confirmed our thoughts, came in relatively optimistic on pricing, and did things like, well, some new ideas that we, may feel are inappropriate, that raise the cost. For example, a second floor running track elevated above the gymnasium. It can add $1 million to the cost, and I just don't think that's something that we as a committee will ultimately get to. But anyway, so we feel good about the consensus. We met with a lot of people individually. We met with the user groups, meaning field permit holders, OGRCC, Greenwich Athletic Foundation, and we had really little thought in opposition to our basic idea. The basic idea is defined as the replacement goals that I think Al probably gave you in the package, which is what the architects started with. That doesn't mean that's the final design, and it's not a completed design, but it's the basic template.
If the scope needs to change because of cost or other constraints that you have on the site, is it the committee that is the ones making the decision of what will the final design will end up looking or
I think
being?
that's, because this whole generated from the committee and the hard work that they did, meeting with all the community groups, meeting with the constituents within the committee. And this was a voted on list of items that the committee came to conclusion on. And I think if something does change as a result of the, the design features or something like that, there's an obligation to go back and explain that to the committee. I don't think the committee is done yet because there's several other things that have to happen. Obviously, we and the committee has to shepherd this through the funding process. And this is just only one step of the funding process. We'll probably have that, need some additional support at planning and zoning and some of those other meetings where people might come out and again, voice some type of, or at least want to have some input on the project. And again, when we move it to some kind of finalization of requesting some of the funding for the actual construction cost, we're going to be in competition with other town initiatives, and we're going to need this concurrency between the committee and the staff.
But you're also going to end up probably having trade-offs when you get to the building and you do value engineering if necessary, or picking other details. So I'm appreciative of all the time that the committee has spent and the dedication that you've shown to this very long process. So I just want to thank you for your work, but also say you'll be in.
One of the best comments we got is, build this for the future, not for now, and don't skimp. We want a nice building. So where that first reared its ugly head is on architects' fees. Al's done this a lot. We had numbers that were reasonable. We had construction costs, let's just say $500 a square foot, that are reasonable. But there could be surprises. Subsurface conditions like drainage, that's a big deal over there. So this is something that's going to be part of the evolution, and part of the charter of this committee is to follow through the plan process, not construction specifications. If there's a major change to the plan, trust me, we and the users want to be involved. So if, for example, because of budget reason, we eliminate an 8,000 square foot athletic area, that's something we want to be able to be involved in.
Right. And I would expect you to be too, because I think that we do want to have that conversation in public over what we want to have in the facility, what we're willing to afford to pay for the facility. So I agree with that approach.
So in the scope of work for the architect, I was just looking for this, there's 4 complete construction cost estimates that are required that they provide. One is at the initial submittal of planning and zoning. So when we go for the preliminary site plan, I'm going to have, it'll probably be based on square footage cost, but I'll have an estimate. Then we wanted one at the completion of the planning and zoning process, because a lot of times the subcommittees like architectural review and maybe even the commission themselves might ask for something in the building that impacts the cost of construction. When the drawings get to be 50% complete, we ask them for a another more detailed actual cost estimate by a professional estimator, and then again at 95%. So we, again, estimates are estimates. I remember when we did the central fire station, the professional estimator estimated 22%. I estimated on my own at 21, and the bids came in at 17. So, and I know there's other projects that have been exactly in the reverse of that. So an estimate's an estimate. It really is what the market will bear at that time of the year or whatever's going on in the country at that time.
Okay.
So,
Mr.
Leslie, I think I understood, you have the release today. Passed, so in the current fiscal year, you have a subject to release for MI for 300,000.
Not MI, just 300,000.
300,000, okay. So that subject to release gets you, that 300,000 definitely gets you to your 30%.
Nope,
No.
I got
This
30,
does.
right now,
This does.
today, I got
Okay.
30%.
So that 300 is not enough to take it from 30% to 100%.
Correct.
And you have a contract where you can, if you didn't get additional, you could, are there steps in the contract between 30 and 100?
No. The next step would be just go all the way. Because at that time, I would have two estimates done. I would have full site plan approval, the building would be where it is,
Then how do you know that you're 190 short?
because they gave us numbers already.
There are add alternates in the contract.
Okay, so let's play out the calendar. So right now, if you were to submit a blue sheet to us for the, call it 200, 190, whatever the number is, that's going to the RTM in October. They do not meet in November. So you would then be in December, likely, before you would be able to get that.
And I would not probably get my final site plan approval until February. So I got time.
He does. Remember, 6 months is the shortest till final site plan. I mean, the decision to our board is whether we're comfortable releasing to get to the 30%, not having the full architect's contract. After listening to this, I am comfortable with that because we still walk away with a product. And you've gotten several bids that were all in that same range for cost for architect fees. So we know that that's the market for the services that we need to build the building. I don't think we're getting ahead of the RTM in this process.
Okay, so let's take it one step further. You come to us for an interim appropriation. Would you suspect that when you do your capital submission, that you're going to put a number in for the next fiscal year for construction?
We're thinking that. I have to think about it because I might initially put a number in and then
We'll
withdraw
cut
it.
it, and you come back and get the
In
rest.
February, when we have the budget deliberations, we'll be discussing that again, I'm sure. The problem is that money comes available, I wouldn't have money again until 2021, and the project will be sitting on the shelf for a lot of months. So I'm actually, when I ask for money coming up, I'm looking out into next Christmas, not this Christmas, or into the end of next year. I want to make sure, I mean, once you start getting into like the first quarter of 2021, it's a crapshoot whether you wait or not. But depending on how this goes, I mean, we might have site plan approval in June. And then it does take some time to finish the construction drawings, but you're looking at, bidding in the late fall of next year.
And starting construction in that fiscal year?
They're right after.
Thank you very much.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the release of conditions for $170,000?
I will move it, but I will do it as a recommendation. I don't think we can. I think we recommend.
We
to the full-
recommend.
To the
Yeah.
full BET.
Second.
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Mason?
Yes.
Non-routine?
This is just before.
I think,
I think it should be non-routine because of the discussion.
Yeah, I think it's not.
And it has to be discussed by the, or doesn't have
certain,
to be.
I mean, even with routine items, I do give a summary, but non-routine is fine. It's still up to the chair to determine how she wants to handle it. Thank you. The next item on the agenda, PW3. How come we have a gap in the numbering if we have PW1 and 3?
They had something in July.
But then why wouldn't
And
that
this
have been
was on there, and
one?
it was pulled,
Oh,
remember?
that's right. It was.
It was,
Thank
this was
you.
pulled, this was in July originally. when you pulled it,
right.
Yeah.
I was confused. So PW3, also release of conditions, $3 million for the Byram Fire Station rehabilitation. We heard this in June. We recommended you get the interim appropriation to complete the construction funding that you would need to follow through on the project, which you did by a vote of 189 to 2 last night.
Yes, we're aware of that.
So is there, and the contract, or the bid documents, or the bids are still valid for?
They're valid till October 5th.
October 5th. Are there any questions?
So moved.
All right. Mr. Mason moved, Mr. Raymer seconds. All those in favor? Aye. And again, this is to recommend release of conditions to the full BET, and this could be routine, right? Okay.
This can be routine.
Routine.
I'm okay with that.
We,
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is TA1, TAG, request for release of conditions for $73,750. And Mr. Miller and Ms. Vetramile are here to talk about it. Just the TAG, the condition this year, which is probably sitting on our tables, was for a semi-annual release. We released half the money in June, so they had access to us July 1, and the second half should be released December. You're here 3 months early to ask for half of what would have been the second half appropriation following last year's cash request. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So you provided to us cash flow statements and other operating documents. The first 2 months of the plan year have been going as you expected?
Yes, they have.
And so the cash, I mean, I'm looking at the cash flow statement because your fundraising, which is the other variable really in, well, some of the variable in your revenue doesn't come until the second half of the year, and your line of credit is still not paid down, so you can't utilize that. You're requesting the additional use of funds. Are there any questions? My colleagues?
I guess my question is, why are you coming in October rather than December?
Sure. What I would refer to is last year we came in October to request that up to 75% of the full year allocation was funded at that point, which meant since 50% had already been funded in July, an additional 25% of the remaining funds needed to be funded in October. And in previous years, TAG had received 100% of its funds at the beginning of each year. Why? Because early in the year, TAG would not have its fundraising monies available to it until our fundraisers and appeals started generating funds sometime October, November at the earliest. The bulk of our fundraising comes in from that point forward up until about March, April. When those funds come in, it helps fund operations not just for that period, that 6-month period in the middle of our year, but also for the remainder of the year as well. So early in our year, before our fundraising kicks in, essentially the town funds become a support to ensure that we get, and a bridge to get to that point where our fundraising does kick in. If we just refer to last year, how operations flowed, when we came in September, same time period, requested those funds, we were still in the midst of a restructuring, which had not yet been completed and was not yet completed until the end of December. At that point in time, we were confident that we could complete a restructuring which would take the organization down from 1.3 million in expenses the prior year down to a level of roughly 900,000 of expenses on a run rate basis. And our original plan was 960,000 for the year, but that assumed some growth estimates that it became apparent by about that time in September and October that those growth estimates were not going to happen quick enough for us to achieve cash flow and support the organization. And so we switched gears and decided to embark upon a further shrinking of the organization to a level that would be consistent with all of the funds that we expected to raise for the entire year, including the town funds, including our fundraising, including our fees that we generate from our existing operations. And we were successful in doing that. But in September when we came, we had faith that we would get there, but we were nowhere near there. And we had, in fact, 3 more months before we completed our ambitious yet achievable targets to shrink the operation down to a sustainable and viable level. We come here a year removed from that, and understanding that for the first 6 months of last year, we lost over $30,000. After a year, which we lost over $400,000. So we staunched some of the bleeding, but in the first half of the year, we were still losing money, although at a smaller pace per month. The second half of the year, as a result of our restructuring, we more than recouped that loss and ended up with a slight profit for the entire year. As a result of a just above break-even year, we're essentially at a cash basis that's similar to where we were last year, except we're not in a restructuring. We've come out of the restructuring, and in addition to that, we've worked with our banking institution, who has the outstanding line of credit with us, which is $175,000. They felt confident enough in what we had achieved that in March, which was 9 months into our last fiscal year, we completed our restructuring the end of December. At the end of March, they took what was a delinquent $175,000 line of credit on their books and extended us out for another year because they saw what our plans were for the future, and they recognized that they were achievable and conservative, and we put them together expecting a run rate from the second half of the year, post-restructuring, would continue on into the following year. In addition to bringing our line of credit into a current state, as of the end of our previous fiscal year in June, or it may have been in July, the bank came back to us and said, we recognize you could probably use a little more cash flow to help your operation. How about we offer you a $25,000 credit card to the extent that you need to pay some of your bills. And that is a reflection of how close we've worked with our financial institutions. In fact, all of our constituents, the BET involved, to keep everybody informed with what's going on through TAG's restructure and beyond. And we've seen, obviously, quite a bit of wonderful fruit that has been born as a result of that. And so we're thrilled that now we can come to you a year later, fully restructured, having achieved a little above break-even results, yet our cash flow needs are the same as they were last year, because they will continue to be the same until we start paying down the line, and the only way we can pay down the line is to run surpluses. We have a $50,000+ surplus accrual basis that is targeted for the current year. On a cash basis, however, we had an overhang from several years that has been building, with the reflection of all of our cash that 600,000 in losses will do, just drained out of the organization. So we carry, at the end of the year, a certain amount of payables into the following year. Well, as of last year, meaning June 30th, 2019, we carried $90,000 of payables into our current fiscal year.
Is that what we're seeing in your cash flows in
The
July?
first month in January, that was all cleared out with the help of the first 50% of the town funds, because we're not getting any fundraising money in that early in the year. At the end of this year, with an expectation that we achieve on an accrual basis a 50,000 plus profit for the year, our expectation is that we will exit the year with about $40,000 of accounts payable, so $50,000 less than the prior year. But because we had to pay $50,000 of the prior years on top of that in the current year, that's why we end up with a cash flow that's just slightly above break even. So accrual basis above 50,000, cash flow close to break even.
Okay.
And if there's any questions, I'll take those before I go further.
Ms. Tarkington?
One question, actually have a couple questions. My first question is on dial-a-ride, because when you presented one, I guess we'll call it the forecasted, full-year forecast, dial-a-ride was in September for $26,000, but now it's been deferred off to October for $26,000. Can you explain that for us, please?
Absolutely. The state has requested everyone who has been in the Dial-A-Ride program to present their information both for the full year and then on a going forward basis throughout the year 3 times for the one-third, one-third, one-third funding that the state provides. We submitted our annual Dial-A-Ride request at the time that everyone submits their request, and typically we would receive a pretty quick response on that. If there were any questions, we'd respond to those questions. Well, I think it was probably a month or 6 weeks later than normal, we received a frantic notice from the state that we need to make some changes to the submission, not in terms of what our plans were, but just in terms of where certain items needed to be placed, what items were town items versus tag items. It was more clarification than anything else. But as a result of having to put in that changed request, it got pushed back. So we're not expecting it into September.
So I had one more question. Since you're coming in 3 months early, and we've never really anticipated this and are subject to releases, and as you know, I was an advocate of continuing to be quarterly. Rather than 3 months early, really releasing that much money, I mean, can you get along if we only release 6 months' worth of money and the rest of it you came back in December?
So
Which is the, time when you're supposed to come, based on our schedule and based on our subject to release.
It is half of the next.
I'm sorry? I'm totally
So
confused.
they're asking for half of what would have been released in December. So it is 6 months' worth of funding, but asking for it early. I guess I'm not sure I understand how not sure how we would answer your question.
Yeah, I'm totally confused too, to be honest. with
So
you.
maybe I can help out. I'll try. In the cash flow forecast, if we take a look at the line item that says town support, the $295,000 for the year,
Yes?
the original plan for that, and by plan, I mean when we came to the public meeting in the town, we requested 100% of our funds at the beginning of the year because we suggested that we were probably going to be in a similar state given that we had just sort of broken even or just above broken even the prior year. So this cash situation that existed the prior year required us to come in September to request up to 75% year-to-date of the total allocation last year, which was 293,000. And that was approved such that by October 1st, we had 75% of our funding in for last year. Same cash flow issues, except it was worse because we were still in a restructuring, and we weren't 100% sure, although we felt confident, that we would get through that. Now that we've been through that, but we had a break-even scenario, we come back with the same cash flow, but our expectation is, as you can see, that we
Right.
will get through the next 3 months with the
So-
73,000, which
So,
brings us up
so
to
now I think I begin to
75%.
understand. So
Okay.
perhaps you can, on this, Roland, if we can just correct the sheet on the justification of request. So it says the request will release 50% of the remaining balance, because we're only releasing 1/4's worth early.
25% of the original budgeted amount, if you'd rather.
Or we could say it that way, but that is not really what, the way our condition was written, so I'd rather have it say,
50%. Just one clarification on the charts before I see if there are other questions. On what you distributed to us, there are two fiscal 20 cash flow plans. One's a cash flow forecast, the other's a cash flow plan. What's the difference? What?
The plan was the monthly support to the original.
So that's the original
20
budget?
Original budget,
Okay.
yes.
The forecast was
The forecast is an update. It's based on 2 months of actual.
So the plan was the original budget, and the forecast is a revision of it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And that original plan, we're looking at a cash flow plan. That original plan, because it's got 50,000 of additional cash from the prior year that makes up that 90,000 that we cleared out in July. That additional 50,000 brings our cash flow to a just slightly above break even for the year, whereas on an accrual basis, those expenses that we're paying in July were accrued and
Right.
reported in the prior year as part of that break even number. So we ended up with an accrual number for the current year, an expected accrual number for the current year that's a little above $50,000.
Right, but you're all about cash.
Which is why I presented the
Right.
cash numbers. I'm aware of that.
Exactly. Are there additional questions? Mr.
Are
Raymer?
you running a balance on the credit card that was issued to you by the bank?
Zero.
There. So you're showing 176,000 of short-term debt, 175 of which is the equity credit line, and not equity, but the credit line.
The credit line, and
So
there's a small balance due on one of our vehicles to be financed.
Okay, but we've now become your credit line, which is what concerns me. So I'm looking forward to your, slowly, I recognize, paying down the credit line so that you can go back and use the credit line for your credit line and not the town's.
That's exactly that is exactly what our expectation is, and that is our plan over the near term, if you will, over the next several years, is to get to the point where we have so much room in that credit line that when we need it, we call on that credit line instead of having to come in front of the BET. And my hope is that we don't have to come to the BET next year for a
The
similar.
materials you gave us show about $1,000 reduction in your short-term debt. Was that a reduction on the credit line, or is that a payoff with some other debt?
Those are payoff of some of the vehicle loans.
Thank you.
Ms. Tarkington? Are you ready?
And in fact,
Yeah.
there's a follow-on, just so that you know, that the payoff from the vehicle loans. We have been trying to upgrade our fleet, but did not have much cash to do so. We recognize that we're paying quite a bit for maintenance and repairs on our fleet, 7 of our vehicles, 5 of which are over their useful life of 100,000 miles. So we put together a capital plan, which over the next several years will fully replace those 5 vehicles, plus the other 2 that will, over the next several years, also exceed 100,000 miles. The first vehicle in that capital plan was received by us just a few weeks ago. And our next vehicle, as part of that 7-vehicle replacement schedule should come to us by January of 2020. So we're moving forward in that direction as well.
Ms. Tarkington.
So I move that we recommend to the full BET the release of conditions for half or for 50% of the second half release of condition. And I would suggest that we do it as non-routine, since it's not when we would normally do it.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
4-0. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
And tag
And then-
thanks to BET for the
And then,
consideration. Thank you.
The chair will get back to you on what's required for Monday if she wants you to attend the meeting.
But Roland, if you could just fix that sheet, that would be great. Or work with.
So the next item of business, we have old business, which is none, and then on new business, first item is preliminary fiscal 19 results. As I was preparing for this meeting and looking at budget guidelines and our financial issues, I had asked Roland to prepare a series of fiscal 19 actuals versus budget, and I thought that they were really helpful, and I added them to the agenda. So I think I will let Roland walk us through the charts that he's put together for us, and we can discuss them as necessary.
I would just like to add, even before Roland gets there, I found them very helpful. And, I think this is a keeper that should be done in the future. So, good work, Leslie and Roland.
So on the general fund, we have scheduled for revenue and expenses, and the revenue is $11 million better than budget, and it's really about a half a dozen of items. $2 million of interest. The tax collector collected $1 million more on prior year taxes, and an additional $600,000 of interest. Bridge reimbursement is almost $2.5 million. We don't budget that at all.
Right.
We never know how it's going to come in. ECS money, we got $1.4 million. Again, we didn't budget any of that. We're not sure if and when we're going to get that. Pilot money, we've got $1.1 million. Again, we didn't budget that. That was a few years' worth. And prior year encumbrances, we liquidated $1.1 million more than we had budgeted. And those items add up to almost $10 million out of the $11 million of favorable revenue.
Just a clarification that the ECS money, that's actually a combination of ECS and excess costs, or was that cleaned up?
It was not, it was all posted to,
Yeah, I think over 900,000 of it is the special education reimbursement.
Yeah, because I remembered ECS had been down to 400,000 in our,
But, so, if it's special education as our, we should figure if we're doing more in that, spending more in that category, that number should come up, right?
the problem is that state doesn't fund us 100% of what we ask for. So as you know, the guideline is when we spend more than 4.5 times the average cost to educate a pupil on any one student, that excess is eligible for reimbursement by the state, but they don't do it at 100%.
And it's not necessarily in the year we're.
And it lags.
Right.
And you don't know what formula they're using. It's not even a published number that you see. For example, we've seen what proposals were for ECS. The special education reimbursement number, it's not as easy to predict.
Leslie, do you have an experience of typically what percentage of the excess they do pay? Or is that very, very, very?
I don't know the answer to that. I think it's declined in recent years, but I don't know. That might be interesting to look at to see how much of their obligation, if you will, they're following through
The
with.
lowercase, oh, I see.
And maybe, does it vary by district? That's a good question, too. Ms. Tarkington, sorry.
Yeah, Roland, may I just ask you, on the LoSiP, we didn't get, or Pete, whichever, we didn't get the 375 that was budgeted in the last fiscal year. Is that something that will continue? And when you put together the numbers that we'll see later, with the budget guidelines, did you have anything in there for LOSIP, or is there some more information in the background that we should be aware of?
This happens periodically. There's been years in the past where we've gotten 3 years all at once. It's just a matter of timely reimbursement. So if we're sitting here a year from now, you might see that number times 2, meaning that last year's will come in early this year, and the other will come in late next year. There's been years where we've gotten as much as almost $1 million, where you had nothing the 2 years before it.
Thank you.
And typically, this may not even be relevant, but we're about $11 million over the budget. Has that, is that what we've experienced in prior years, or are we starting to budget more aggressively that the actuals have come in lower? Is there a trend?
We're budgeting more conservatively. A lot of these things we don't budget at all.
Right,
So when it comes in, it's a favorable
right.
variance.
okay.
We had that conversation in the last budget cycle where
We
we're
did.
like dropping everything to zero, but we knew something was coming in.
Yeah, if you recall 3 and 2 years ago, 4 or 3 and 2 years ago, the opposite happened, where we budgeted pilot for the hospital, didn't get it. ECS 3.4, didn't get it. We were short like $5 million one year. So this is.
It's a
we don't-
pendulum.
We're
it-
chasing it.
We can't
We have to be in the
project
right
what
place.
the
Right.
administrations are going to do each time. Everybody, in the case of Governor Malloy, when he did it 4 years ago, everybody was shorted because the budgets had already been passed, and then he pulled the plug on disproportionately. Some of the more wealthy towns were hurt more than the poorer towns.
Although we do have to look, $2.5 million of that was bridge reimbursements, which we sort of account for in our capital plan. So while it's recognized here as revenue, it is estimated as we look forward for expected payments. So, on revenue, sure.
So I don't necessarily expect you to be answered this question, but under, the tax collector, where, Roland, you've said there's about $1 million in revenue and about $600,000 in interest. So, he's given us a report that he's collected $4 million, and I asked him for a breakdown to deliver to the BET, sort of by year, so we could, get that information. Is this something, this $1 million, something that we will then have to subtract out of our revenue receipts that we think we will get, like going forward, or even as we think about this current fiscal year, will we have to say, gee, this $1 million came in early? Because remember, some of those people, really weren't that late. They were, there were still payments due last year.
The ones that pertain to the regular invoice that last were posted to the appropriate accounts.
Right.
Current year taxes, even though they were on that list of properties that you noticed, they were actually normal revenues for 1819.
Oh, so they were posted as if they would be normal?
Yeah.
That's not exactly true, because Lauren and I went through and she found a bunch of errors that she wanted to correct.
Yeah, I think,
Some of them haven't been posted to the correct.
okay, so this is more to come. Thank you.
Okay. So let's turn to the expenditures, next page.
And the expenditures, kind of reflect back the budgets that we squeezed, the non-100s in the departments, and the percentage of the money that they get back at the end of the year has been reduced. And even the Board of Education, and that's down to
$600,000.
$600,000. And in the past, that was well over $1 million, and some of the other ones are just almost breaking even.
Right, so another trend we have to be aware of as we look for our budgeting.
Right.
Why would the probate court have spent only 60% of its? I mean, it's not a lot of money, but it seems odd.
They tend not to adjust their budget. They just say,
You can make that change in the budget hearing.
Yeah, I think
I know,
that's
I
negligible.
wouldn't
I'm not
dare.
worried about that.
Lest I
right.
die and have an estate in this town.
So just to understand what we are going through on the what we call the triple R accounts, we've got the P and Ls for 4 different sections. Did I skip a page? No, so on Nathaniel Witherell.
Sandy Woodrow, one that there's a sheet that's been handed out before, it shows the negative balance at the end of this year, almost $2 million.
And that's after the 2.7 that we contributed.
Right.
Yes, it is.
What's their, before application of this, what was their fund balance, or negative fund balance? Was it small negative?
It was a small negative, yes.
So-
I think about $180,000.
So with this, they end up slightly over a $4 million negative fund balance, starting
Yes.
the year we're in right now. Thank you.
And I don't know if it's more significant on the other ones.
The golf course is turned negative.
No.
Well, the balance didn't turn negative, but their experience this year, their revenues were short of budget. They did control expenses to match that a little bit, but they're still,
I think sewer maintenance was the next page. Am I missing something?
it was.
Okay. Okay, just,
But Roland indicated there's not a lot to report on that one.
the golf course, obviously, as you know, with their capital, their fund balance goes up and down as they
Yeah,
do
it
projects.
does.
They sort of save up, do some tea or equipment or whatever they do, and then it goes down, and then goes up. But
You're thinking that affects the expenses, is that what you're saying, Mike?
yeah, it's always in their, if you look at their, you can see everything's pretty consistent, you know, personal services are up a little bit. But then if you go to their capital, right there, it's just showing 142, but that's just on a
Yeah, but
budget.
what's interesting, and, it may not, they're still positive, but their revenues are down
Yeah, I mean, the
15%,
expenses
10 to
came in actually a
15%.
little less.
That's material. So,
Rained a lot last year.
it did, it was a bad weather year. But Laura's out there to make sure that they've got their revenue now.
The one thing that's helping a lot this year going forward, really helping another large capital plan, is they made the last loan payment of $150,000 in 17, 18.
Right.
With no loan payment.
Right. So now they'll start building up in their capital reserve for the next thing they want to do. We gave them a 10-year loan for the building. They paid it back, 0 interest.
Okay, next one was the parking fund.
Yeah.
First is $500,000 paid for budget.
The personnel that they weren't paying for. There were other things, too.
Well,
State,
I mean, we have to remember, we've got DPW people in there, too. So
Right,
It's a
right.
blend between between the actual parking department and the DPW signs and lines department, which is also booked in there.
and the air rights are there for revenue, line 3.
So ticket receipts, where do they go? For
For this-
parking tickets issued? I'm not seeing,
That's in the general fund.
yeah, but you're not showing it as revenues here.
No,
No,
those are general fund revenues.
Okay, all right.
Okay. State Railroad is a,
So I found this one interesting because this is state money.
yes, Ms. Harkington.
So this is state money for the railroads. It's for the other railroads because the railroads, the stations are owned by the,
The revenues are split on foreign stations. So this portion, then one of the things that's happening, the fund balance is built up, and
I can't spend it.
Al's tried to use the money for a project that he hasn't got approved yet. The concern is
So,
They
so,
might come in and grab this money, which they're certainly entitled to, it's their money.
well, that's true, but this, I mean, again, I thank you, Roland, for this whole package. It's the first time we sort of looked at the year as it closes and actually looked at everything. But when I looked at this, and, I went to, I guess it was a land use hearing for the GPI, they indicated that Greenwich was one of the only 2 stations that is privately owned in the state. So here, I mean, so quite frankly, they should be doing it, not us. But here's some money that could perhaps be dedicated to the redevelopment of Greenwich Station? No, it can't be? Why not?
It has to be one of those state stations.
Well, I understand that, but perhaps, we, the town, or Ash Forest, need to have a discussion with the state and say, well, there are only 2, we're one of the 4 highest volume, which they keep talking about, stations in the state, so perhaps some of this money should be dedicated to the redevelopment of a new station. I would certainly.
That's a
Well,
policy
it's
issue. I
process.
I would think there's probably also value in improving the stations at Cascob, Riverside, and Old Greenwich. And I know that we've tried to spend money there, but maybe revisit what needs to be done in those locations.
So we don't own them, it's the state, so the state has
Right.
to make the decision.
State
So I'm
has to make the
saying
decision,
they
the state
haven't
has
made that
access to
decision, But
funds.
here's a pocket of $4.8 million, and maybe we should be, not me or you, but someone,
Okay. School
I mean,
lunch?
it could be you.
School lunch? So they had a negative this year.
Remember they came in for an interim?
Mhm.
Expenses.
Okay. OPEB?
It looks like we're managing that very well. Thank you, Peter and Roland.
Well, based on what actuarial formula we use.
Right. Retirement, the retirement is just our expenses that we're charging
Correct.
towards
The
the
administrative
retirement.
costs.
The administrative costs. Okay. Shellfish and harbor management. Okay, thank you. Fund balance. This is not yet finalized, is that correct, the fund balance numbers?
It's very close. The number is going to go up $100,000 or $200,000, but if you looked at it's a 2-year comparison, the fund balance ratio. The BET has a fund balance policy. It slightly declined from 12.89 to 12.44. However, there's large swings in the assigned portion. If you look at the bottom square, where you can see the total general fund balance is 64,125. The unassigned is 44,035. That goes into the ratio. The encumbrances have come down dramatically from 6.4 to 4.8, and the use of fund balance went from 11.4 to 15.2, and 2 of the changes were we put $3 million in to fund the risk fund, and then the BET, when it came time to vote, I think Jeff proposed it, he put, I think, another $700,000 or $800,000 in there.
Right,
But it's still, we had a good year.
but we still increased.
We
right.
did- It was driven by
The revenue.
by the unexpected revenues and the normal return of expenditures.
Right. Mr. Mason, yep.
Peter, on your BET fund balance ratios, if you go down to the third group there, fiscal 18-19, you're showing a negative 643,000 in risk fund in that box.
Correct.
And we know that. And I guess the question is, what would happen if that number in the risk fund was 3 million, where we typically have kept it, but we've been on a streak? So what would happen to that if you had the 3 million there?
We actually, this is June 30th. July 1st, that number increases by 3 million.
Got it.
So we're actually positive
Right. So
July 1st.
That's my point. So then that becomes, how do we look at that money? We look at that money as committed towards risk or just unassigned fund balance? How do we look at that 3 million?
The first part, it's committed for
Okay.
risk to pay out claims. We usually know well in advance
Got it.
when they're going to hit. Sometimes we don't know how much. We're looking now at self-insured retentions that are in the millions of dollars per claim.
So what we need, just thinking this through, so what we need is we need this piece of paper, 7-1. You know what I'm saying? After you make that,
Actually, it's a combination. It is 7-1 for the general fund, because if, see the 15,278,000?
Sorry.
See the use of fund balance on the bottom, 15 million?
yes.
So
Okay.
that's basically, GASB says for the general fund, you reach out in the subsequent year and pull it back is committed. We can change the BET policy to do that,
No, I'm just,
so that in the case of the risk fund, it's June 30th, but GASB doesn't tell us to
got it.
grab the 3 million.
Got
So, I mean, that's one of the
So what I'm saying-
recommendations
so
for
3
next
million
year's
becomes
BET.
committed out of that, is what happens. The risk fund becomes committed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
on
the
7-1.
same thing with you know, the capital
yeah.
non-recurrent
Right.
is dedicated or committed to capital projects.
Got it. Okay, got it.
Okay. And then the other chart that I thought would be helpful to distribute is the current capital appropriation statement. I don't think we need to go through this now, but it's really kind of background as we think about budget guidelines. And I think it's always good for us to periodically see where we are on capital spending.
So can
Mr. Mason,
Have we heard anything on a CIP committee group working anything yet?
I have not heard anything.
I would-
Has maybe Roland or Pete have?
Selectmen issued a schedule for when are working on the budget and when it's submitted to the selectmen's office.
The reason I say that is obviously, it's a big outstanding number, but I think the CIP, as they try to look at things, unless they're just going to just prioritize maintenance versus capital, if we're going to try to reinvent the CIP, it sort of, what's in motion is going to be very important to them. We don't know who that is yet.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Harkington.
So, I took this sheet and made the same kind of format, subtracting out the debt and so forth as I have in the past. So this particular sheet, it's as of September 13th. So we've sort of been through the summer cycle of work for the BOE, I guess we'll call it. But also certainly for Al Manelli and his group too. Totally, when you add everything together, there's over $125 million of projects where unencumbered and, available balance. Of that, which is like returning to big highs or hires. The total town projects, again, minus the BOE, is now $81 million, over $81 million. And then the BOE projects, therefore, in the town projects are 44 million, just over $44 million. And so, we always hear, well, you can't count New Lebanon School. So if you take out what's left of, the encumbrances, but unspent and the available balance, the BOE minus the New Lebanon School is at $38 million, which again, is a lot of work to be done as we begin to contemplate the budget guidelines for next year. So I just thought it would be helpful if we went through and looked at these numbers as we're proceeding to think about next year.
All right, so then the next.
I mean, next year's budget guidelines.
Right. So the next item on the agenda is fiscal year 21 budget guidelines. So in your packet was a first draft at an approach for this year's budget guidelines. And so let me walk you through the structure and some of the assumptions that are included in here. And I want to start with, first, the structure here is to use the same that we used last year, which is that this Exhibit 1, which we all kind of look at point 2 and try and look at the numbers, is intended to be status quo. What would the budget look like if we didn't make any changes to the current town structure, town spending? It's not intended to be what we need, what we want to get to, what we think the budget will look like at the end of the budget process in March. And so, at the top, we put projection using level services, but again, that's the starting point. The assumptions, the key assumptions that go into here is we know we have some labor contracts that are open. We don't have information on many of them. So the assumption here was, just as a starting point, 2.5 for most of the unions, 2.9 for the teachers. The reason the percentages look higher is because the new positions line, the third line, was rolled up into the first two lines to get to the calculation. Then a 2% escalation in everything else, and to point out that Roland made the point that the town departments using that 2% number on all the other MOCs has caused compression, which is they're giving less money back, they're spending more of it in the budget. But that gets to a bottom line of, or a total department operating cost of 2.47% blended, breaks down to 2.27% for the town increase and 2.62 for schools. On fixed charges, healthcare increased by 10%. The assumption we're using here is that it would have been an 8% increase on July 1, 2020. The state will be moving to regionalized pricing of the premiums, and they're rolling that out over 2 years, so it'll go up 2 additional percentage points in fiscal 21 and an additional 2 in fiscal 23. So we put in a 10% increase in healthcare there. OPEB was an 8% increase. Should OPEB change because that's primarily a healthcare benefit, that the 8%, we might want to think about that, whether the 8% is still the right number to use for OPEB. Pension contribution reflects the retirement board's discussion in July over using the same rate of return assumption of 6.75%. That assumption hasn't increased. Risk fund, we're estimating that the $3 million we put in July 1 this year is going to be totally used up this year, and we'll need to be at least $3 million for next year. We'll have more information about that as the year goes on.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
Before we, on the pension contribution, Pete, when we went in July, they said that there'd be sort of some finalization of numbers just because of, whatever, the internal workings, not because of the change in the return rate or whatever. When are those numbers finalized? When will we know whether this number is the number, it's a good number, or it will have some adjustments to it?
The retirement board, October, the answer to the question is the October meeting. We'll have.
Their retirement board.
Retirement board's meeting.
Thank you.
Nathaniel Witherell, again, put in here the $3 million of operating assistance they'd need in fiscal 21, continuing the same where they are. We will need to develop a plan for funding, getting the appropriation to fund the loss that they had in fiscal 19. However, that's up for discussion by the BET, and that might be better had in February and March as we're doing the budget. School lunch, reflecting what we had in the budget for, it's reflecting their actual this year is the 240, right? And then other fixed charges. That gets down to an operating cost increase of 3.84%. Capital is reflected here is just the total projects number, the $86 million reflects what was in the fiscal 21 year in last year's plan. So no judgments made about what should or shouldn't be in there. That can be refined as we get input from the departments. The capital tax levy is just assumed to go up another $3 million here as we've been doing. So that gets to a total operating or total amount to be financed of a 4.5 increase. That means town budget at $462 million. The use of fund balance here, this was kept flat at the 3, I decided to start using round numbers maybe for that, of where we ended up in last year's budget as a starting assumption. Leaving the line in for risk fund is maybe that's a consideration of, does that come from fund balance or not, but it's assumed at 0 in here. And then the other key assumption is just that the grand list is increasing 0.5%, which is a number that was discussed with the assessor. So without any other changes, we get to 4.68% increase in the mill rate at 12.229. Ms. Tarkington?
Can I just come back to your comment on the risk fund?
Mhm.
The risk fund up here, so it's adding another $3 million, and today it's at whatever it is, basically 2.5, because we carried over the loss. Right? And so what you're talking about is
When we-
over and above adding the $3
Yes.
million,
Well-
and whether we take it out of some other fund or we actually tax the taxpayers.
Right, the choice
Okay.
there is
Thank you.
whether we tax for it or not. And we had gone through the outstanding cases to get, for this year's, but for the fiscal 2020 budget to get that 3 million. So we'll probably need more money going forward. So that's where we're kind of the starting point of the discussions of just rolling over. When we then turn to the text of the guidelines, so and let's not go to the highlights, which kind of come out of the analysis, and go to, on page 3, reflecting new initiatives and area of concerns. These are issues that we've either heard, that we've dealt with really as a BET and know are out there on the table and need to be addressed in some manner. First is cybersecurity. Second is construction management. Third, the Board of Ed special education out-of-district tuition was a surprise to a lot of people, the Board of Ed as well as us last year, and we'd like to know that that's being understood and properly budgeted. Nathaniel Witherell, and with the in operating performance, waste management fees and the change in recycling costs, and raising the issue of tipping fees or increasing revenues potentially as something to consider there.
May I just stop you?
Yes.
So can you just share, because perhaps I haven't heard this, you talked about the transfer station and the increased costs. Do we know, or have they bid this out? Is there something here that we know more details
No,
about?
I don't, and I don't know if Roland knows anymore, but I don't believe there's any new contract out there. We do know that the volume is always an issue, and that's their first, the DPW's first goal is if they could reduce volume at the transfer station, it reduces pressure on a lot of areas. So, but just from a national issue perspective and things we've been hearing about even locally on recycling changing the cost to the towns for the recycling program, it's going to put pressure on this particular area of the budget, and it's a large budget item.
Well, again, I'd rather keep national issues out of here. I
Right.
think that our DPW has done an excellent job. I mean, we're not in the state programs. We ship our, they're very sophisticated, and I think they've done a superb job. There are many issues here that I think are going to be complex and will take a tremendous amount of time. I don't want to create any issues if we don't have to address, create that issue or address that issue in this upcoming budget year. I mean, if there are real things here, then I can see
So there
this.
are two things to split it into, costs of what we're operating now, and we can get information on that to see whether the management there has concerns in that particular area. And the second is increasing revenues, which
What-
was stated,
Well, I'd rather focus on reducing costs than increasing other types of revenues, fees, and so forth, which may or may not be tax deductible to our residents. So, on this kind of thing, my focus is going to be on the cost side of it, or managing costs, I'm very concerned about adding additional fees at this point in time.
Tipping fees may reduce, in fact, the volume.
I don't think so. Unfortunately, I would, we'll see.
So we can debate
see.
that.
Right, that's in
You know, what,
February.
right now,
Right,
as
right.
stated, this is just asking for the analysis. It's not implying that it
Right.
would be accepted or not. And it's not really, it requires Board of Selectmen and RTM authorization if that were to go forward. So there'd be a lot of analysis on it. Energy conservation initiatives, this is something that is getting increasing focus now. And then the healthcare expense. This is not an issue which this will continually put pressure on our budget going forward, and to have an understanding of what we can and can't do and focus on that particular area.
On energy conservation, perhaps we also should, this appeared to be mostly buildings, but I would say energy usage also includes fuel and so forth.
Mhm.
It's like how many cars we have and so forth, so I'd like to see automobiles in there as well when they.
Okay.
I don't know if they're looking for any
Yeah,
suggestions.
yeah, no, then the document talks about additional areas for consideration. These are things that we've had, I guess they're repeating the areas of initiatives, but this is consistent with what we've had before. We really do want them to focus on every line item in the budget and to look where changes can be made to reduce the pressure on the budget and to get information about grants as well.
So I agree with you on this point, but I think you're talking about document that mostly goes to departments, but you should emphasize the leadership of the town, and the BOE needs to look at these costs, shared services or mergers between departments or whatever, I think, because that has to come from outside the departments, but I think it has to be done to, on a selective basis, as we've talked about over time.
So to move towards where the initial draft is in a direction for budget guidelines, and looking at these numbers, the guidelines communicate that this can't be a status quo budget. We expect the new initiatives to be addressed, but we also want to continue to control the rate of increase in budget. That's the goal. I think it's unrealistic at this point to say we're going to reduce the increase in the budget.
Kathy, could you just pull the shade down just a speck?
Can you pull the shade down because it's in Leslie's eyes? Maybe we'll keep it this way, and then you can't read your document.
Thank you, Kathy, that works.
So the target here, as I put out, is to ask the town and the Board of Ed to come in. It's about 0.5% lower than level services budget. So the Board of Ed is no more than 2%, the town's no more than 1.5%. That generates about $1.6 million towards whatever reduction we want to make in the bottom line. But I'm also concerned with the new initiatives that still may not give us, I'm on page 2 now of the guidelines, that may not get us to where we need to be in terms of a bottom line budget. And so the approach we used last year, we asked each department to come in and tell us what you would do if you had to reduce your budget another 1%. I think those discussions were interesting. Some departments, it was more educational and more interesting than other departments, but it wasn't totally useful information at the end of the day. So the approach that I'm suggesting here now is, instead of putting the onus on the department managers in identifying potential budget changes to theirs, is to go one level up and to ask the first selectman and the Board of Education to give us a prioritized list of an additional $1 million each. And at that point, we can discuss what the implications are to the organization and make judgments as to what we need to do to get to a budget that we can approve, and have the information available. I think it could be could be more effective than what we did last year.
Which is basically what I was just saying.
Exactly. So it's in line with how you were looking at this. The shared services and structural and operating changes, the document does not include anything specific right now. It does make a reference in the capital management of looking at the response to that organizationally combined town and Board of Ed, but it's putting the onus on them to develop the proposal, and then we can figure out how to take it from there. I think we need department buy-in on proposals, and it's very difficult when the VET tries to establish its objective and put that onto the organizations. So that's in general how I think an approach that I think will work for this year's budget guidelines. They're going to be incredibly difficult for departments to meet. It's not status quo. It could be reducing headcount, and it could be reducing services, but we're asking for the information on what those would be and what the impact to the residents and the bottom line would be. So let me open it to discussion. Mr. Argento.
So just, simply on this, inflation has been running in this calendar year on a per month basis, somewhere, last month it was 0%, the current month is 0.2%. But overall, if you look at an annualized basis and you look at this year, it's been running between 1.3, and we have a high now of 1.8%. And so, we can go into last year and the year before, and for years now, our budget has been substantially over the inflation rate. And I do think we need to reassess the impact of this on our taxpayers and on the values of our homes. So this is a general comment, just as we go ahead here. And I'd also like to say that I am disappointed that once again, we're differentiating between the increase in operating expenses that's permissible for the town, which is capped at 1.75%, which is still well over double the inflation rate. And, well, it's not over double, well, it depends on how we're looking at this, but, it's still very substantial. It's over the inflation rate, right? And then, because we have to add in all the rest of their costs, and that we've separated out and once again allow the BOE to have increases, and here it's at 2%, 25 basis points higher than the town. And so we're having this disparity where, again and again, the BOE expenses far exceed the town operating departments, and, we're absorbing all the rest of the expenses, law department and the, risk fund, whatever it happens to be, within the town. But when you look at the operating department, so I would like to see the equality of this and not permit, and have them equal, but that doesn't mean have the town increase to 2.0, but, more, the BOE needs to talk more seriously about how they can meet the town's budget. And again, I think this is a platform budget, just a, big general statement. This is a platform budget for the following year, which is when we're going to have the rebound. And we have to think about the costs of our taxes, our homeowners, and what's going to happen in terms of probably, and certainly in all the years I've been involved, or certainly for the last 20 years, after the big shift to the backcountry in around 2000, this will be the first shift in the last 2 decades where it's really in more across the board, and it's going to come from the backcountry. So I just think we have to, we have to do all the wonderful things that you've got in here and think about, and we need to spend time on it and discuss it. So, but I think we also need to think about this is a different budget. We have to think about what's the impact and what kind of base does it create for next year's budget, and that I think is going to be, a tougher year for all of us.
Okay, Mr. Mason.
5 things. When I did the rough review before, I look at what we had come back in fund balance, the pluses between revenue, the negative with Nathaniel Witherell, the plus in spending, we spent less, parking, And then I look at what I know we can anticipate this year, +5 for healthcare million, +2 for pension, +3 for risk. I'm just going to use that number for the moment. And Nathaniel Witherell is 4, although you've captured part of that. So we're close. That's closer than it's been in most years. When we talk about tipping fees, to me, tipping fees are something we've dabbled in several times, never seen a number on it. Let's not have a conversation without any numbers. We dabble in it, we call it a new tax, we call it this, we like it, we don't like it, never seen a number on it. Have not a clue what the impact would be on the tipping fees, what the rates would be, we've never seen that. By the way, it's not our job to do that, but the point is, status quo, I'd like to see those kind of terms removed. I don't remember a 4% range from 2.5 to 4% mill rate range increase in 16 years. My memory's not that bad yet. We have not had a range that we've agreed to that has a 4 in it at all. So that's not status quo, that's new. In honor of Mary Lee Kiernan, I would say this to you, Leslie, there's a lot of things you touch on multiple times, and I really support those. But in honor of Mary Lee Kiernan, we need brevity. That's what she used to say. That this document, guidelines go everywhere. Guidelines are not just used by department heads. They're used in labor negotiations. They're used in everything we do. They're RTM members use them. Everybody uses them. They're used for different things. So I think we have to do that. And then the last question is, what do you see our process over the next 30 days? Do you see us with a workshop, or do you want written comments? Just kind of an idea of what you see for us going forward with these.
I think I'm open to discussion about how you best would like to proceed. I mean, I think we can do written comments, or if you want to schedule a special meeting to discuss alternative approaches, we can talk about it.
Whatever you want to do. I mean, in the past, we've had just a meeting on guidelines.
See,
And it's helped out.
I don't remember that, so that's,
I thought we had a workshop, I know we've had special meetings trying to get them approved in the past.
yeah, that goes
So can I
back many
suggest
years.
this? Suppose, because you've not had these very long, they came to you in the package, you hadn't had much opportunity. It seems like a good conversation to have after the two of you have had a chance to digest this. I had a chance to work with Leslie on this before, so these aren't as new to me as they are to you. But you may wish to have the opportunity to look at it, and then maybe we'll understand better whether or not a workshop is a good idea and necessary, or whether or not it's not necessary. I agree with what Mike said on the tipping fees. I do think because many of our trash haulers haul trash from more than one municipality, and because the other municipalities they draw from have tipping fees and we don't, there's a danger there. I don't know the realities, but there's a danger there that we're handling without tipping fees some volume that really ought to be going to other communities' waste management. But as Mike has pointed out, we don't know the realities. And so it's impossible to make a judgment on things you don't have the facts. Not that it always bothers us, but in this case, it ought to bother us. But I think the tipping fee issue is actually a small collateral issue. I think the bigger issues are some of the other items. And we can take care of these in due course. I think the hard issue is going to be to end up with a meaningful dialogue with the departments of where are there services that we're rendering that could be curtailed or handled. I don't think any of the departments would readily come back to you and say we have a lot of waste or have a lot of slack. I think if there's slack, I think they squeeze it out. But I do think there's a danger there that we're running programs which maybe if we understood more information about them, we might make the judgment of it would be okay to discontinue a given program. And that exists perhaps on the school side as well as the town side, but my thinking more is on the town side. And that's a conversation that we've tried to approach for several years now, and we've tried different techniques, and candidly, we haven't been very successful. And by the time we sit down in February at the meeting with the department heads, that's actually a little late for us to be achieving that reality. So we need to find some way to get them to focus on that issue ahead of time, to begin to take it seriously enough. I don't know exactly what the magic of that is, Last comment, for years and years and years, we were using the 2 to 4% as the projected guidelines. It was a sort of number we just threw out there to pick up a bracket. Admittedly, we haven't done that in the last few years, but for a long time, more than a decade, year after year, year after year, we were expressing a 2 to 4% figure, as I recall.
Ms.
We'll
Tarkington.
talk about it.
So I think Jeff had some good points. I was just going to say, I think Jeff had some good points there, and I think also, Leslie, you're talking, we sort of both said, we need to talk more to the leadership of the departments, and, just throwing this out based on the conversations I've just heard here, maybe we need to sort of change who we address the budget guidelines to. Maybe it's only, we send it to the first selectman, the Board of Education, and appointing authorities, and give them, telling them that we need to have, work more together, and, we need to, do the kind of things that Jeff is talking about, to, basically reevaluate legacy programs and continue to offer, well-structured, all the great things that we continue to offer to our citizens and do it well, but, look at some of our legacy programs and see if it isn't time now to assess them. And quite frankly, knowing what I know, I think it's across the board, Jeff, town appointing authorities and the BOE. So, but I just wonder if maybe it's time to, address the budget guidelines at a higher level. I mean, certainly copy all the departments, but, as you stated so well, Leslie, we've had this, they come, some of the suggestions are, it's usually a little targeted so that, to get our sympathy, and now we need constructive help. We've, as Pete and Roland have shown us, there's very little we can take out here, and I agree with Jeff that we're running at the higher rates of 2 to 4% or whatever in the mill rate, but you have to also remember in the early 2000s and so forth, when we were doing it, it was a much higher inflation time. This is not a high inflation time, and I think you have to correlate your increases with your economy, and the economy in Connecticut, sadly, is not as good as we all would like that economy to be in Connecticut, and we have to adapt to it because the state isn't providing the kind of financial resources that we've had the advantage of in the past. And
So just to bring this close, first of all, I know that you refer to the rate of inflation extensively. Our labor costs are rarely close to the rate of inflation, and so to expect a town budget increase at the rate of inflation, I think, is directing the town to a level of services probably wouldn't be supported by our residents. So while we need to understand what that rate of inflation is, it's not like we're going to expect to see that at the bottom line. Healthcare costs, our largest item in the budget's going up 10%, if not more. So,
and maybe it's time that we look at things like, going back to the private sector. I mean, we talked that, when we, went to the government, and then maybe we need to talk about how much the employees contribute to the healthcare plans, as they would in the private sector.
right.
I mean,
but
these are
and all-
discussions that we
These are
need to have.
discussions, and all those are fixes. None of
Right,
them are
right,
quick
right.
fixes. So as far as next steps, what I'd like the members of the Budget Committee to do is to review these guidelines and potentially provide to me in writing an outline of the issues that you need to discuss, and then within the next week. And then from there, we can determine whether they are better off handled in a discussion or just via changes for a draft at the next meeting that we hopefully can then move forward to the BET. So with that, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is approval of minutes. We have the July 17th regular meeting and the July 17th special meeting. Leslie, you said you
So I'd like
had
to,
a
which
wording
one do you want to do
change.
first? Because
on
I
the-
just moved
on the
the
agenda.
special. Oh, which one do you
That's
want?
on the agenda is the regular meeting
Regular
first.
Okay, so on the regular meeting, I had one, you accepted everything, and I do have to admit, which I think I already did to you already, I rushed to meet your deadline because I think people were anxious to get off on vacation. Everyone, have a break. And one sentence wasn't very good, and then I think it ended up.
Just tell me
Yeah.
what sentence and
So
how
it's
you
a
want to change
sentence,
it.
a sentence
What
in.
page are we on?
We're on
Page 2.
page 2,
Thank
and
you.
we're in ED2, the BOE.
Okay.
And so the sentence is that the committee asked about the process of hiring the architect. Well, I think I asked if the contract was put out to bid. So I would just, say the process of whether it was, it wasn't just hiring, it was the type of contract. Was it a contract that was bid out, or was it a single source contract? The process of whether the contract was single source or had been put out to bid, and, in lieu of hiring the architect.
Yeah, I'm okay with you making changes, but why? but
That's the
just-
only one.
But just out of curiosity, why isn't all that an inquiry about the process of hiring the architect?
I'm sorry?
I mean,
Why isn't that covered by the current language?
Well,
Exactly.
I think the clear thing here was that the Cardinal Stadium bleachers was not put out to bid. It's a large, single-source contract, and as we later learned, perhaps not as, I don't need to go into this any further, but I do think that just changing those few words
So
wouldn't
what
hurt
do you,
anyone.
tell me again what you're proposing?
Well, the committee did not,
So the committee
Asked
asked
about-
about whether the architect was hired through an RFP.
and whether it was single-sourced. Would work. That's fine with me, Leslie.
That's in lieu of the existing language, or in addition?
And then
However-
the second half of the sentence would stay the same.
Right.
And if a building committee, that would say the same.
Yes, and if a building committee would be utilized. Because that was also
So we're
discussed.
taking out the words about the process
Just
of hiring the architect. And substituting whether the architect was hired by an RFP, or whether the hiring was single-sourced, comma, and then it goes on, and if a building committee would be
Correct.
utilized.
Correct.
Do you have to say whether twice? That intent will be in here. Maybe the language, the exact words
Okay.
get
Well,
slightly
I-
modified,
Leslie, you
but
do,
I get it.
I'll leave those words with you because I think
All right.
it's
With
worked
that
well over
change,
the.
Can I have a motion to
I,
approve the minutes?
I move that we
Subject to
approve the
Seconded.
minutes, and we don't even need the,
Seconded.
I know you'll
Okay.
do
As-
them, so I'm not worried.
As the.
Mike, you're okay?
Yes.
And then I move that we approve the July 17th special meeting minutes.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. With that, meeting adjourned, 7:03.
So moved.